Thank you, Maureen. So I'm sorry to not be with you this morning. I hope that the sound is not too bad. I will try to speak slowly. If you don't hear me, stop me. Okay? It's okay for you?
Yes.
Okay. So for this first presentation, I'm going to present you some recent developments concerning modeling of recrystallization with application to nickel-based superalloys. These developments were realized mainly through two projects, two share projects, Opal share and Digimul share. You will see some industrial application of these developments, and all the data come from Safran, industrial partner. Okay, so for the outline of my presentation, of this first presentation, after a brief introduction, I will remember the rest of level set full field modeling of crystallization. What are the bases of this full field method? After some illustration concerning nickel-based superalloys, where I will try to show you the rest of full field framework comparatively to phenomenological equation. We will discuss of some conclusion and perspective, but I will time also to develop some of these conclusion and perspective with the two following presentation in 2 hours. So now I'm going to a brief introduction concerning nickel-based superalloys. So you have understood that this kind of materials are interesting for Safran, mainly because nickel-based superalloys are used in some odd parts of aircraft engine. As you can see here in the red part, you can see that a lot of nickel-based superalloys are used with in use temperature of 650 degrees approximately. And why nickel-based superalloys are studied very precisely by some industrial partners. The main idea is try to improve aircraft efficiency by increasing the in-service temperature. But of course, if we want to increase in-service temperature, we need better materials, or we need to improve used materials like nickel-based superalloys. So, for that, one aspect to improve properties of metallic materials, of course, the main idea is to be able to couple thermomechanical processing with the prediction of properties in use properties of materials, and to improve these aspects. The main idea is to improve microstructure or to predict microstructure evolution during thermomechanical processing. Why? Because we know that material properties are directly related to evolution of microstructure during thermomechanical processing. One difficulty when you want to model, of course, microstructure evolution in context of thermomechanical processing is the fact that generally you deal with large deformation of material. And if now we detail exactly what are evolution of microstructure, what we will discuss today is the aspect is to be able to predict recovery, crystallization, and grain growth. Okay, we have three main mechanisms. Interest, of course, mechanisms have the same purpose. The idea is to minimize energy of the materials. We will try. I will present you some numerical method able to simulate this different mechanism. Okay. Now, if we discuss about the modeling scale, of course, we can deal with microscale simulation, like, for example, with Forge software, with phenomenological equation. We can deal also with a main field model, where we will be able to predict mean grain size or grain size distribution, for example. And we can also work with full field simulation. And one interest of full field simulation is, of course, to predict finally some evolution, but also to improve main field model or field logical equation. I will try to show you this morning that one interest of full field simulation is not only to simulate very precisely evolution of microstructure during thermomechanical precision, but also to use it like numerical model, like numerical test, to dispute and to improve existing main field equation. Okay? So, on the main aspect, maybe one kind of terminology. When I will this morning discuss about main field model, the aspect is to be able to predict some attribute of the microstructure, like the mean grain size or the grain size distribution, but without model topology of the microstructure. Now, when I will speak about full field simulation, I will speak about prediction of topology of the microstructure. And of course, here we are going to discuss about polycrystal scale, or mesoscopic scale if you prefer, because of course you can have full field or main field at different scale. But here this morning we will stay on continuum mechanics, and we will stay at the mesoscopic scale, the way to describe polycrystal with continuous numerical methods. Okay, I will don't discuss about dislocation dynamics, dynamic molecular simulation, but only continuous numerical methods. So now I have took time to describe the rest of full field simulation in terms of precision or in terms of improvements of main field model. But one difficulty of full field simulation remains computational times. Indeed, of course, at yet it's not possible to simulate evolution of microstructure at the macroscopic scale by using simulation at the microscopic scale in each integration point. It's not realistic. And so, we work a lot, of course, today to improve computational cost of full field simulation. And the presentation, the following presentation that I will present you at 11:30 will be mainly dedicated to improvements of computational cost of level set simulation. But I will not detail a lot this aspect in this first talk. So now if I took time to introduce some full field numerical method used in the state of the arts, you can find different well-known names like stochastic method with Monte Carlo or cellular automata simulation, what we call also front tracking method with vertex simulation, where we discretize grain interface, and what we call front capturing numerical method with phase field on level set simulation, where we describe in implicit way numerical method. Of course, each full field method has its own vagueness and strength. And so I will take time this morning in my presentation mainly to introduce level set simulation, which is quite comparable to phase field simulation in terms of capturing description of the grain interface, but where you have a thermodynamic description of migration in phase field simulation, we use a kinetic description for the grain boundary migration in level set simulation. So now with this, with some a bit of history, don't forget different elements. Of course, we speak about recrystallization near 1 century and 50 years. Finally, recrystallization terminology was introduced by Sorby in 150 years ago. For the development of main field model, the 50s were the golden age of developments of main field model with Smith and Zener pinning, called GMAC model or Burke and Turnbull model to predict mean grain size evolution during grain growth, but also the developments of Van Neumann and Millis theory. And so we can speak about the 50s as a golden age of main field model. But for full field simulation, of course, this approach was mainly developed. The beginning of this approach could be 30 years ago with the developments of stochastic approach like Monte Carlo and cellular automata. Of course, so we can say that full field simulation was developed with appearance of computer facilities, And it's finally numerical metallurgy. We can say that numerical metallurgy has 30 years old. So, concerning level set methodology, at the beginning, level set simulation was developed also 30 years ago, but Osher and Setien, but mainly for fluid structure interaction, where only one interface was described by a level set function. It was used later, 20 years ago, by Merriman, mainly, to describe massively multi-phase problems like polycrystal. Okay? Here you have an example of what is a level set function. It's quite simple to describe. In the left side, the picture in the left side on the bottom, you can see a grain interface in blue. And you can see that a priori in level set description, the grain interface is not conform to the finite element mesh in black. But what we use in each integration point of the finite element mesh, for example, the black points in the finite element mesh, we defined a mathematical function, which is described by psi here, which is the Euclidean distance of each node to the blue interface. And what we use finally is a distance function to describe the grain interface in the finite element mesh. And you can see also generally a sign convention. Here you can see that we use a positive distance, Euclidean distance inside the object, inside the grain, and a negative distance function outside the grain. And finally, the grain is perfectly described as the zero is the value of the distance function. And you can see that you have a discrete description, an implicit but discrete description of the grain interface. You don't have any thickness for the grain interface in this approach. Okay, you can precisely describe where are the grain interface by using the zero is the value of all the level set function used to describe the grain. And you can generalize this methodology for an important number of grains, as you can see in the picture in the right side, where you have a polycrystal, a stainless steel polycrystal, with here 80,000 grains it was realized by Ludovic Mer during his PhD. Okay? And of course, we use also coloring algorithm, coloring theory to minimize the number of level set functions to describe such polycrystal in finite element mesh. Typically here, you have only 30 level set functions to describe this polycrystal. The main aspect is that you can use one level set function to describe an important number of non-neighboring grains. Okay? And another interest of level set methodology is that you can use quite easily level set description to perform mesh adaptation at the grain interface. You have here an example for nickel-based superalloys is Inconel 718 materials. And what you can see is a statistical description of the grain with Laguerre-Voronoi tessellation and an exact description, an experimental image to immerse in this polycrystal second phase particle. And you can see that effectively inside the grains, in some grains, you can have second phase particle. And you can see that the mesh is perfectly adapted to the grain interface and to the second phase particle interface. And you can see different message in this picture that with the RSF framework, you can use, of course, experimental image to immerse grain interface, second phase particle interface, but you can use also statistic description of the grain with Voronoi tessellation or Laguerre-Voronoi tessellation. The main difference between Voronoi and Laguerre-Voronoi is that with Voronoi you can respect a mean grain size, but not a prescribed grain size distribution. With the Laguerre-Voronoi tessellation, you can respect a grain size distribution. But another message is that, of course, it's kind of what could be interest of such kind of finite element mesh adaptation. For example, if you want to simulate grain growth by capillarity, information inside intragranular information is not important. All is defined by the capillarity on the energy at the grain interface and by the interaction between second phase particle and grain interface. And in this case, of course, it is interesting to use coarse mesh inside the grain and fine mesh at the grain interface. And we have proved by the past that this numerical strategy is interesting in 2D, but I will show you in another presentation that in 3D it's not the case. And you will see with Pascal and Baptiste during DGMUTP that this kind of meshing strategy is used in 2D in the DGMU software package. You will have time during this week to generate such kind of complex finite element mesh with the DGMU software. Okay, now I explain you that comparatively to classical phase state simulation, in level set simulation, all is defined by kinetic equation at the grain interface, and not by directly minimization of a given energy, but by the fact to use a clear kinetic law to stimulate the minimization of the system energy. And very classical law introduced 70 years ago is defined by equation in the left side in the top of my slide, where you can see a relationship between velocity of grain interface defined as the product of mobility of the grain interface and driving pressure of grain binary migration. And finally, in level set simulation, all the physics is defined by this kinetic equation. The main aspect is to be able to precisely respect the driving pressure responsible of grain binary migration. So, on what you can find classically at polycrystalline scale with monophase material, or here we don't have exactly a monophase material because I have detailed the fact that we use second phase particle, but at the beginning here in my presentation, second phase particle are considered as static. And finally, we can consider that we have only one phase which migrates during recrystallization, and we can say that we have such kind of monophase material for grain binary migration. And we can see that what we use classically is two driving pressure, one which is due to the stored energy during deformation. Don't forget that we will speak about thermomechanical processing, and that we can have large deformation of materials, and of course we are going to store dislocation during deformation, and these dislocations are responsible of intragranular stored energy, and the idea is to be able to take into account this driving pressure to simulate dynamic stabilization and metadynamic and static recrystallization phenomena. And we must, it's necessary to take into account this driving pressure, which is defined as the stored energy during deformation. And the second driving pressure, which is related to capillarity, is classically defined as the product of the grain binary energy and the mean curvature of the grain binary interface. One traditional mistake in the state of the art is the sense of curvature in 3D. Don't forget that in 2D the curvature is scalar, but in 2D the curvature is a tensor. Okay? And what we call mean curvature in capillarity in 3D is the sum of the main curvature in 3D. Okay, it's why you can see that you have two equations, which is used in 2D and another one in 3D. In red below, you can see two classical laws used in the state of the art, and in fact, you can see the red color as the fact that these equations are important, but also that these equations are quite limited. But I will detail this aspect main in a presentation in the slide of Julien Fausti, where we will discuss about anisotropy of grain binary properties. But you can see that classically for grain binary energy, we use Red-Choquet formalism. Okay, you can see classical Red-Choquet description of the grain binary energy, which is related to the disorientation in the grain interface. And mobility of grain interface is classically defined like an Arrhenius law, where you can have a constant co-exponential term, or M0, or which can be defined as dependent of the temperature, and with activation energy, with classical Arrhenius equation. And generally, we use this kind of equation to define, to simulate migration of grain-model interface. In the simulation that I'm going to show you after, finally, gamma will be considered as isotropic and not dependent of the misorientation, and mobility will be considered as dependent of temperature. Now, I'm going to describe you some history of level set simulation, but I will not detail the equation because it's not really important aspect of this first presentation. But the main idea is that to show you that 15 years ago, we have begun to develop level set simulation to be able to simulate static crystallization with size-saturated nucleation or necklace nucleation without considering deformation. And in fact, with level set formulation, you can simulate this kind of evolution with classical convection equation for a classical convection equation used for the level set evolution. And 10 years ago, we have added a diffusive term in our equation to be able to take into account grain growth by capillarity. And finally, with this formalism, we are able to simulate static or post-dynamic evolution or grain growth evolution by considering the two driving pressures that I have shown you before. More recently, 5 years ago, we are improving numerical aspect of the software with different mathematical improvement of mathematical formalism of level set simulation. And this evolution, this improvement explains the fact that we were able with Transvalor company to develop the DGMU software package. And this improvement was mainly dedicated to exact utilization procedure and what we call evolutive graph coloration algorithm in our level set simulation. And more recently, we have also improved our finite element framework to be able to use stored energy defined during deformation by using main field equation to the prediction of evolution of dislocation density, and most recently by using also crystal plasticity formulation. And with these elements, we are quite able today to simulate like dynamic crystallization evolution with a large number of grains in polycrystal. I think that you will play with such kind of simulation, but today in DGMU TP. And what is interesting also is that for prediction of stored energy, we use classical equation also used in our main field model, as Baptiste will show you in the main field TP that we will have this week. Okay? But the interest for us to have the same equation in full field and main field is to be able to discuss some comparison, to perform comparison between main field prediction and full field prediction, and also to use the same procedure to identification of parameters thanks to experimental data for our full field simulation and for our main field simulation. And of course, it is an important aspect of our works to be able to identify numerical parameters comparatively thanks to experimental data. So now I'm going to focus my talk for 20 minutes for application to nickel-based superalloys. And one important aspect is to be able, when you have second phase particle, is to be able to take into account full field interaction between static second phase particle and grain phase. And in the state of the art, it's well known like Jenner pinning phenomenon I think that it's better to speak about Smith-Zener pinning phenomenon because it was introduced at first by Smith and not by Zener. And it's why I prefer to use Smith-Zener pinning terminology to describe interaction between grain interface and second phase particle. And what you can see in my scheme is that in dot line you have a one grain interface, and in the gray part you have a static second phase particle. And finally, the Smith-Zener pinning aspect is quite simple to understand because it is exactly the same equation that you can have at a triple junction between two grains. It's finally to respect the Young-Ewing equilibrium at the interaction position between the grain interface, but here not with between three grains, but between two grains and static particles. And if you use the same Young-Ewing equilibrium, which is finally the link between the angle of interaction between the grain interface and the particle interface energy and the grain interface energy, you can obtain the equation in the bottom left side of my slide, which is a relationship between the angle of interaction between the grain interface alpha, the angle between grain alpha between grain interface and static particles, and the difference energy of the system. And by respecting this equilibrium, you will of course modify drastically the local curvature of the grain interface, which is responsible of the pinning of the grain interface by the second phase particle. And now, if you use all the assumptions used by Smith-Zener, you will obtain different equations for the definition of a driving pressure due to the presence of the second phase particle. But with this main field equation, you can obtain the classical, well-known Smith-Zener pressure of a given statistical description of the second phase particle in polycrystal microstructure. And with this classical Zener pressure, you can also obtain an equation defining a limit mean grain size of the polycrystal during grain growth due to the presence of a second phase particle population. And of course, this limiting grain size is used industrially to limit the grain growth during thermal treatments of nickel-based superalloys. But with level set full simulation, you can directly respect the interaction angle between the grain interface and second phase particle without introducing in the kinetic equation an approximation of a Smith-Zener pressure, Smith-Zener pinning pressure in equation. Finally, in the full field simulation, you can respect angle of interaction, modification of the local curvature, and the Smith-Zener pinning pressure will be naturally taken into account in the simulation. And it's exactly what you can see in the first simulation, where you have interaction occurred of a 3D grain interface, and you have interaction between, in a way, the grain interface and the second phase particle. And you can see the pinning effect of the static particle to the grain interface. And here you have the same thing with the level set simulation in 2D, when you can see in green the grain interface. And of course, interaction, you can see that interaction is complex, because at the beginning, here you dilate grain interface and it's favorable energetically, but at the end you create interface. And finally, Smith-Zener pinning pressure is exactly defined by the fact to create or to dilate some grain interface at a position interaction with second phase particle. And now I'm going to show you some industrial example of this kind of simulation for Anconex 718. On the right point, maybe it's difficult for you to see the right point, but the right points are second phase particle immersed in the finite element mesh, and you can see that it's a classical thermal treatment with a given density for the second phase particle, delta phase here. And you can see that at one moment you obtain really a pin microstructure due to the presence of second phase particle. And you can see that finally you have a static microstructure due to the presence of the second phase particle. And here, of course, we are in superabuse condition, and we don't have evolution of the second phase particles. And we can, as you can see, maybe more precisely be able, for example, with level set simulation, to test the fact that if it is important to take into account wedge shape of second phase particle, or if we can approximate second phase particle by circle object, for example. Okay, we can do a comparison of this kind of simulation with real shape, with the same simulation where we take into account circle to describe second phase particle, and to see if is the fact to approximate second phase particle has an impact on the prediction. And it's exactly what I have explained you at the beginning, that you can see this kind of simulation interesting not only to predict microscale microstructure, but also to discuss at the polycrystalline scale some hypotheses of the numerical simulation. If it is important in the main field equation to take into account the real morphology of second phase particle or not. We can test this aspect with this kind of full field simulation. So, of course, same kind of simulation in 3D, but the potential cost of such simulation is quite really important, because we understand that it is necessary to have mesh adaptation at second phase particle interface, and the numerical cost is quite important. But what I want to precise is that level set methodology is generic in terms of dimension space, and you can use the same algorithm in 2D or in 3D. Now, some validation of full field simulation, some discussion tools with comparison with experimental data. You can hear pure grain growth in subsurface condition for Antoinette 718, and this prediction were compared to experimental data properties of Aubert et Duval. Here, this comparison were realized by Aubert et Duval and not directly by myself. And you can see comparison of the prediction of the mean grain size of the 2D or 3D polycrystal comparatively to experimental data. Now, another interesting discussion for such kind of simulation is the fact to be able to predict what we call abnormal grain growth. It's quite classical in nickel-based superalloys to observe abnormal grain growth. And of course, it's a problem for our industrial partner, because they want to avoid heterogeneities in the grain size of their material to improve mechanical properties of the material. Okay, and if you look to the state of the art, you will see that when abnormal grain growth is discussed during grain growth, generally what you will see is three main reasons to explain appearance of important grain in the microstructure comparatively to the size of the other grains. As you can see in the picture in the bottom left side, you can see that one big grain race, which is really more important than the rest of the microstructure, with a quite homogeneous mean grain size. And generally, if you go in the state of the art, you will see that this kind of phenomenon is discussed, is explained by three main mechanisms: that you can have some advantage of some grains at the beginning of the thermal treatment, what we call initial size advantage. You can also have some quite anisotropy of grain binary energy and mobility, which can explain that one grain interface could be an advantage of the other grain interface. And you can have also some heterogeneity of second phase particle population. You can easily understand that if you have a zone where you don't have second phase particle, you will not have pinning in this zone, and in this zone you will have a larger grain size evolution than in the zone where you can have second phase particles. But, for example, Safran came to see us with some experimental data where these two hypotheses were not possible. And the idea was to investigate with numerical simulation, full field simulation, another hypothesis to explain appearance of abnormal grain growth, and which is now well known as critical evolution due to some residual presence of stored energy. The main idea was to discuss the fact if with a very small amount of stored energy, for example, some non-fully recrystallized grain, it was sufficient to explain abnormal grain growth for some grains. And the idea was to use some approximated experimental data to perform full-field numerical simulation, as you can see here. With this kind of simulation, we can see that, in fact, to do a summary, in the lab side, you can see this kind of simulations with thermal treatment where you don't have stored energy, but only growth due to capillarity and pinning due to the presence of second phase particles. And on the right side, you can see the same evolution, but with small residual amounts of stored energy due to non-fully recrystallized grain. And what you can see with the full field simulation is effectively the appearance of abnormal grains comparatively to the other simulation. And finally, this simulation was a way to validate and to improve experimental procedure in the thermomechanical path for the forging of these alloys. So, another aspect, and I will stop here to have time for 5 minutes of discussion, is the fact to use full field simulation to improve classical main field equation to predict limit grain size. I explained you that a classical way to use Smith inner pressure is to predict the limit mean grain size of the grain of the polycrystal due to the presence of the second phase particle. And you can see in this equation with the definition of the mean grain size with the definition of the radius minus r is the mean size of second phase particle, and F factor is the density fraction of the second phase particle. And you can see that it's well known that we can relate the mean grain size of the polycrystal thanks to definition of the second phase particle population. And in fact, you can improve this equation by some numerical tests by using a large scale of second phase population particles numerically with different density. You can finally build a numerical test plan by homogenization propose new main field equation, optimized main field equation to predict limiting grain size for second phase for nickel bias superalloys materials. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. So maybe one last movie to explain that we develop also some methodology now to be able to simulate also in static second phase particle. You can understand that if we want to have some simulation near the solvus temperature, because it's interesting for an industrial partner to say, okay, can I use these materials? Okay, I can use these materials in subsolvus condition, but what happens if I use these materials near solvus temperature? I will have evolution of second phase particle, and I would like to be able to predict grain size evolution. And you can see some recent simulation realized by one of our PhD students, Karen Alvarado, where you can see in black second phase particle, which evolved due to an increase of the temperature during the thermal treatment near solvus evolution. And you can see at the beginning some grain, some pin grain interface, which begins to evolve due to the disappearance of second phase particle in black. Okay, thank you for your listening, and I hope that The sound was pretty good, and I hope that you have some question also.